night. How do you keep the crew engaged Sunday night? Second night out, everybody's tired. I think races are won and lost Sunday night. Paul?
We have an old thing we always do. Ever since I started 28 years ago, my dad would bring Harvey's Bristol Cream, 12 o'clock Sunday night. We just pass around the whole bottle, and it just wakes you up and you just go.
Those are the family secrets.
How do you keep people engaged Sunday night?
Well, we actually, you know, for years, and again, I've been on the same boat for a long time. For years, we sailed with a crew of 10. And you know, and it was, I think, the thought was, you know, less sea bags, less food, less Harveys, less everything with 10. And we didn't do so well. We ultimately went to 12. And what we discovered with 6 people on deck at a time is that it was much easier to sail the boat harder. You had enough people on deck to sail hard, to race, just like you do on a Saturday afternoon. If you're short-handed and people are overworked and they're getting tired and they're trimming the sheet too long and holding the wheel too long, I think fatigue sets in. But if you have enough people on deck at night, there's usually 2 or 3 or 4 of them that got the energy to rally the other guys and keep them going. Thank you.
I just want to say one thing, Teddy. You know, I couldn't agree more with everybody said here about at night. I mean, how many times do you wake, you know, when you get up in the morning, okay, when the sun is rising, how many times is the boat next to you the same boat that when the sun went down? You know, it's very, very, very few times. So someone's making some big gains or someone's made some big losses in that time period. Very rare do you ever wait and the sun comes up and with next to the same boat. It's just very rare. I have found in my experience. You know, so somebody went somewhere, you know, and having the right crew and keeping them going at night and having people in the right places is huge because big gains are made at night.
Agreed. There are the courses. Cove Island's back. I wanted to mention I'm guessing that there may be people here. The last time Cove Island was sailed was 1999, 10 years ago. And I'm guessing that there are some people here who will be sailing Cove Island this year who've never sailed that course. And so I'd like you to comment on the course, the preparation, the perils and pitfalls. And one of the things we've always said about the Cove Island course, it's kind of 2 or maybe 3 courses, races. It's a race to Cove, it's a race from Cove to the Ducks, and it's a race from the Ducks to the finish. Bob, why don't you start?
Yeah, I think that's fairly accurate. That when they talk about getting the weather and getting changes, that if there's going to be any strength to these systems, so if you're going to have breeze of more than 15 knots or so, what I'm going to tell you now, you ought to just ignore, because it's going to be strong enough to override the effect of the thermals on the land. But when you really think about it, this is the middle of July. It's one of our 2 lightest air months of the year. And that although we've had races like last year where there's a lot of breeze and such, that normally there's quite a bit of light air. And when that happens, I see that even these most sophisticated models tend to just not accurately predict the interaction between the land and the shore. So what we've got going here is that if you look up the Cove Island course first, that odds are that you'd have a chance of getting a little closer to the Canadian shore than you would the American shore once things got going. Now, during the daytime, the air heats up on land much more than it does at night. And so when you start this race, it's pretty much going to force you out into the middle of the lake so that there really won't be a factor of the shore. But it's very conceivable that you could spend all of Saturday night making a choice as to how close you wanted to be to that Canadian shore. Now, how would you make that choice? That when nightfall comes, and usually somewhere around 10 o'clock at night to 11 o'clock at night, that land starts to cool down significantly. That is going to essentially make all the air above the land start to come down and compress onto the land, and it's going to squirt out into the lake, so that you're going to get an easterly breeze. And those thermals on a hot day, anything above 85 degrees, could be up in the 6-7 knot range. If you're into the 90s, they could be 10 knots. Now, let's assume that you have this 85-degree day and you have breeze that's 6 to 10 knots out of the west. And now you have this thermal on shore that's 6 to 10 knots out of the east. How much air are you going to have where it meets? None, right? So, regardless of what this weather system says, is that if in fact the weather or wind, the general component of it, is anywhere in the western quadrant, you got to be as far from the Canadian shore as you can be that night. Now, about 6 o'clock in the morning or so, these tend to shut off and you can spend the rest of the day. Now, vice versa. If the breeze was out of the southeast, the breeze might be southeast at 6 out in the middle of the lake all night. You get 8 miles from shore and it might be more easterly and at 12. So imagine all night your competitor's sailing in 6 knots, tacking downwind, you're sailing in 12 knots, beam reaching. You think you might have a 15 or 20 mile lead? And so it's absolutely imperative to know whether you should be on that shore or not. As you get up to the turning mark and into the docks, you have shore across the north. You're usually far enough away from it. If you're more than 15 miles, certainly 18 miles off these shores, there'll be no effect from them. So in general, you sail across there. I've sailed about 25 Cove Island courses, and for one reason or another, before you get to the docks, there seems to be more breeze if you're further south. Now, I'd like to be able to tell you why and how it all works and all that, but I don't have a clue. I just know when boats get to the south of me, they pass me, so that's not good. You've got to get around the docks, and they stick out quite a ways and are in your way if you're going upwind. The predominant direction really is it's likely that you're going to beat on this course coming in, and if you do, in the daylight hours, there is definitely a trend of the breeze following the sun. So that if you start in the morning and it's out of the southwest, odds are by a little later in the afternoon it'll be to the west, and by the time you get to nighttime, it'll be out of the northwest. Why, I don't know, but it just, if you're sailing and going upwind across the straits in that time, that's going to happen 80% of the time. You do get some choices. If the breeze is out of the west and you are going to calculate that you are going to get near the straits in the evening, obviously that westerly thermal coming off the land, plus the west is going to be stronger. There's a reason to go to the Michigan shore going up. If, on the opposite, that you're going to have more of an easterly component, or particularly a northeast, you better not get anywhere near the Michigan shore. So I guess the summary of this whole thing is that you want to follow the weather models that Pete and Paul talk about, because they absolutely work, but you want to moderate them with that. If the breeze is going to be light, you absolutely have to be where the wind's going to be. Forget about wind shifts, because if you're sailing in 10 knots of breeze and somebody else is sailing in 4, it doesn't matter what angles you're sailing on, you're going to beat them.
Al, go ahead.
That easterly thermal that Bob speaks of it's hugely powerful. I mean, the first few times you encounter it, you don't think it could be a thermal because you're 15, 20 miles offshore. You say, well, this can't be a thermal out here. I think the water, as you get north of that east and west line there, I think the water's so cold that the thermals just get hugely powerful. So in a Cove Island, that thing's a huge part of the race. It really is.
You're glad to see Cove Island back?
Oh, I love it. I love it. It's two separate and distinct races, to be sure. It's a tough, ugly coast up there. It's foggy. It's rocky. The Canadians haven't invented much in the way of lights and radios yet, and none of them are here. And it's just a great race course. And in dealing with the ducks and yeah, just a lot of great decisions.